you so much for joining us today for today's webinar on business continuity planning for a practice shutdown. In the spirit of reconciliation, Practice Hub acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today. Thank you so much for joining us for the fourth webinar in our Foundations for Successful Practice Management series. We have had yet another overwhelming response to this webinar, so it's clearly a topic of much interest at present, and we have a great panel joining us this afternoon. On our panel, we have Gary Smith. Known as the Guru of Practice Management, Gary is an academic director of UNEP health programs and an experienced health practice manager. He is a former national and New South Wales president of the AAPM and holds a number of board positions in the healthcare sector nationally and internationally. With more than 35 years real-world experience as a practice manager, Gary has a broad expertise in managing large multidisciplinary healthcare facilities and in healthcare reform. He understands how to navigate the challenges practice managers face daily and is uniquely placed to share his knowledge on running a successful, sustainable healthcare practice. Joining Gary today, we have Denise Whitehead. Since 2011, Denise has been a practice manager of several practices in Western Sydney. In 2018, Denise received the GP Synergy Practice Manager of the Year Award for the Nepean, Western and Northern Sydney, recognizing her dedication to registrar training. In 2019, Denise was awarded the Went West PHN study tour to the USA to visit some of the leading facilities implementing patient-centered medical care. Denise has an ongoing interest in all aspects of team-based care and holds a diploma in professional practice management through UNEP and is a current member of the Australian Association of Practice Management as well. And finally, on our panel, we have Anna Maria Gibb. Anna Maria is co-creator of My Practice Manual, now Practice Hub. She's passionate about helping healthcare organizations run more efficiently and minimize risk using better practice management systems and processes. Anna Maria has a background in practice management and qualifications in business and adult education. She regularly presents on business systems and processes. I'll now hand over to Gary Smith.
Thank you very much, and welcome to you all. Well, today, business continuity planning in relation to a shutdown. How topical this is for us at present. And I suppose when we look at today, we're going to look at the introduction of risk in business continuity. We're going to talk about systems and systems development, and we're going to learn from a COVID shutdown practice. And of course, Anna Maria will take you through some of the resources it may provide to support you from Practice Hub regarding this. So on a daily basis, we all manage risks, whether it's driving a car, and especially if it's your partner, from purchasing new equipment, introducing new procedures, or determining work priorities. Risk management is an integral part of doing business. So as a manager like you and me, we have to create solutions to unpredictable problems. We're going to hear about Denise's experience of a practice shutdown, which has prompted us to think about how important it is for any practice, not just general practice, to prepare for a sudden practice shutdown. And I just want to indicate that I went through a partial shutdown as well. So I feel Denise's pain, anyone else's pain who's been through this. So what are the effects of COVID-19 on your practice if we have a shutdown? Well, there's a number of challenges for us, and Denise and I will talk about these as we move through the presentation today. There's increased workload on administration staff, the challenge with technology and expectations and obligations around patients. What happens with continuity of regular care of our patients and the changing regulatory environment by our stakeholders advising us like Medicare Australia? And I suppose we need to think about as well the effect of COVID on our practice, not only in shutdown, but COVID in general is around the increased operating costs that we may be confronted with on a day-by-day basis. Now, managing COVID-19 by control measures, and Anna Maria is going to have some policy and procedures of COVID-specific infection control measures, which she will show us in Practice Hub today. But one of the areas in managing control measures is around infection control requirements. And there's a whole range of areas that we need to think about when we're looking at the infection control measures. One of the things we need to consider when we're putting into place COVID safe plans and also infection control measures is that what do I need to do to minimise the risk of shutdown in our organisation? Now, New South Wales Health have put out an excellent matrix in regards to what shutdown procedures may be avoided as a result of taking certain infection control requirements. And Avant will provide you a link to that document in the resources coming up, but I have used it in my practice And it's a great tool that we could use to minimize the risk of shutdowns accordingly. So what is risk management? Well, the key components of this definition is about identifying opportunities. How can I improve? That's one of the great things of managing risk. How can I improve? How can I improve my policies, my procedures? How can I improve my communications, both with patients and fellow colleagues? And I flag that because it's an important part that Denise and I are going to talk about later on, is around communication. We need to remember that risk is not only clinical. It can be a business risk or a financial risk as well. So there are clinical and non-clinical risks. Now, in this COVID environment, we need to address all these areas of risk. Part of risk is not just the clinical, but it's also about the financial and non-financial components of our risk. So when we're looking at any control mechanisms, any disaster recovery plans, we have to address those other risks that we are challenged with. So what is the concept of risk? Well, you've all heard about cause and effect. You've always heard about cause and effect. And what does risk mean? Have you heard of reputational risk? When we're putting together a disaster recovery plan, we need to think about what is reputational risk. This is when the reputation of your practice could have potential or negative publicity or public perception or uncontrollable events that may have an adverse effect on your practice. So we need to think about what may be these reputational risks. I don't mind saying that my office manager of 35 years was a secondary contact and she had 14 days. She felt so challenged. She felt like a criminal, which is really sad that she actually put the practice at risk on this. So that's sad that employees may have that feeling as well. So start to think about what may be these risks that we have. Do you have a risk management framework in your practice? And hopefully after today, we can talk, you may have a framework that you can manage in relation to COVID shutdown. But one thing I will say to you, risk is inherent in everything that we do. We will never eliminate it. All that we can do is attempt to minimize it. It's not if we get hit by COVID, it is maybe, my view is, I take the view, it's when. So what are the benefits of risk management? And there are a number of benefits of risk management. And I don't need to go into these into too detail, but it's really about the benefits of risk management is minimizing what I call firefighting activities. All it's doing is putting into place an effective structure by which we can minimize our risks. That's what risk management does. It identifies, puts into place, you put into place mitigating strategies and an ongoing management portfolio from there. Part of risk management is really about systems, and people who are on this webinar may have heard me talk bang on about systems, how important systems are in relation to risk management. I cannot stress it enough. Think about it. Managing of COVID and disaster planning is about systems, systems, systems. Basically, systems thinking is a way of helping a person to view systems from a broad perspective that includes seeing overall structures, patterns and cycles in systems, rather than seeing only specific events in a system. Systems thinking is about the whole of business approach. And I think you'll find when Denise talks about her practice shutdown, I know in mine, there were parts of the jigsaw that had to go together to allow me to put the big system together, because it's a whole of practice approach. So think about systems thinking. So how do we define characteristics of systems? So there are a number of characteristics about defining of a system, but the first one I think I want you to think about is really around every system has a purpose within a larger system. Think about the jigsaw pieces. Every jigsaw, whether it's setting up an appointment system due to shutdown, whether it's the IT person or the phone system or whatever it may be, every part of a system forms a bigger system. So when you're thinking of a shutdown process, think about the big systems. Another defining characteristics of systems is really about feedback. And I must admit, it was a result of Denise's feedback at a forum that I was involved with that would allow me to go away and refine my system as a result of feedback accordingly. So what are the benefits of systems? As I've said previously, there are a number of benefits of systems. We have good systems in place. It has proven that there's a faster response time in answering questions from anyone else. A good system allows faster response time. And in a shutdown, we need a good system and in response time to answering questions. And the best thing I ever did was set up a WhatsApp group. I have 3 WhatsApp groups and I know Denise will talk about this, 3 WhatsApp groups, one for doctors, one for nurses, one for admin staff, but I have key people in each one. And my gosh, it just worked to a treat when we had to go shut down. Could not have done it because it's a system. It's a part of a system. I suppose that when we talk about benefits of the system, it's also around we can deliver promises more accurately to our staff, our internal customers and our external customers. Part of which I have just spoken to you about is communication, the importance of communication. To me, there are the 7 C's of communication. And there they are there: correct, complete, concrete, concise, consideration, courteous and clear. And I'm going to touch on each one of these, which are very critical in relation to how do you communicate. Clarity, the importance of using plain English. We need to understand in good communication the usage of acronyms, the usage of words that you and I know about, but what about other people? Even in COVID shutdown, we have to communicate with clarity to all our stakeholders, internally and externally, which are our patients as well. How do we communicate with our patients? So using of acronyms, good, clear clarity of messages. Straight to the point and specificity. What am I actually saying? When we start to ramble on in messages or communication, we lose people. Simple and fluid sentences when we're talking about clarity. The next C is concreteness. This is about being factual. The fact sheet put into words, being concrete. Where are our reference points? Where are our references? What do we refer to? So when we're thinking about communication, the information we said must be accurate and must be referenced. So if we are communicating, let's reference it accordingly. The next one is completeness. When we're looking about completeness of the 7 C's, it must be complete. We must ensure that any documentation must be concise. Then we have consistency of messaging. We're saying to send messaging to everyone. That's why setting up, in my case and Denise's case, WhatsApp groups, because we've got consistency of messaging to everyone. Completeness of messaging for communication is critical. The next one is what I'll call consideration. Consideration is really around things like we need to know our audience. We need to have an understanding of health literacy in consideration of communication. We need to understand the knowledge level of who we are communicating with. And of course, we need to consider what support mechanisms do we put in place. Considerations are important. The information that I send to my doctors on my WhatsApp may be different to the information I provide to my administration staff. Maybe different messaging, but standardization and consideration types of information are critical. The next one is conciseness. And I've touched on this before. 7 C's, we need to be concise, clear and consistent themes, no repetition because we lose it, and saves time and adds value. Conciseness is around saving time, and communication is very critical in relation to shutdowns regarding conciseness. The next one, of course, is correctness. The use of language, how important we use the correct language, because the correct language increases trustworthiness. Trustworthiness with our fellow workers and also our stakeholders, our patients, government, who we need to relate to. I would say that how important that when we're talking about the exactness of correctiveness, we have to ensure that it implies factual and it's linguistically and it is accurate. Spelling, grammar is important. That gives credibility when we're talking about correctiveness. The last one is really about courtesy. When one is communicating, the points of view and feelings of the patient should be considered as well. Being courteous is critical. It's an essential part of communication. It's important we need to respect the audience, whoever that audience may be, or whoever the listener may be. So terms that show respect towards our audiences will make communication more effective. So the principle of courtesy and completeness, as the previous slide, actually work hand in hand. Let's talk about the professional communicator. And Maria, any comments in relation to the professional communicator?
Gary, I think probably the main comment, the thought I had is around this is it's so important to document this information and to keep your communication materials easily accessible for the whole practice. And if they're easily available, they can be quickly updated. So I think that for me is the main thing. As you develop all these communication resources, make sure they're easily available and can be updated quickly, because this is a very quickly changing world that we're living in at the moment.
And I just want to clarify on your last term there, the fluidity of the environment which we are in. The challenge we have as a professional communicator or as a communicator is, what are we communicating? We know in the COVID environment, it's changing by monthly, by weekly, by daily, now by hourly, and a good communicator has to be across what those changes may be. It's the relevancy of information. Now, as a good communicator, we actually have to ensure our resourcing, or we have a good source of truth. Not what the next door neighbour said or what someone else said to you. Where is the source of truth? That comment may allow us to go off and look at where the source of truth may be. So when we're thinking about the professional communicator, which is you and me, we need to think about any options that we may have in discussion with our staff or patients during COVID. We need to take action and follow up. That is critical, because someone has to make a decision, whether it's you, in a very fluid environment. And we'll talk about in a moment with Denise and I some of those reactiveness of our communication processes. Sometimes when you hit send, all of a sudden within 2 minutes later, there's a new requirement on our doorstep accordingly. So consider yourself being the professional communicator. I think in good communication, I have one statement. It's not what you say, it's not what you do, it's really how you make me feel. So in addition to the 7 C's of communication, creativity and credibility aid in communication. Now, creativity can help people stay engaged, enthused, while credibility is added to a message if it's supported by true facts and figures. The challenge that you have got when we are talking about keeping people involved, it's really about keeping them energized accordingly. Well, now we move across to some examples around shutdown. We've gone through the principles of communication, and that's an important part of risk management. I'd like now to introduce Denise Whitehead, who's a practice manager who has experienced a lockdown. I think firstly for a 14-day period as a result of close contact at her practice. And Denise is going to provide us with some critical bits of information that will help us, if required, to manage the operation of our practices during lockdown. My practice went through a lockdown as well as a result of a secondary contact. And if it wasn't for Denise's feedback at a previous discussion forum, which highlighted a couple of these key needs, I would have found it hard to recover as quick as I did. So over to you, Denise.
Thank you, Gary. I manage one medical centre. It has 14 GPs, 6 nurses, 11 admin staff. And I also manage the accompanying allied health centre. It has 12 allied health providers, not all working there at the same time, thank goodness. But we experienced a shutdown in mid-July that was totally unexpected. So we had a patient come in who was a new patient to the practice. They were unwell, they'd been triaged, they had tested negative for COVID a couple of days earlier, was seen by one of our doctors, recommended to have a follow-up COVID test just in case. And that was on the Monday. On the Wednesday, we were informed that that patient had tested positive, and everyone who interacted with that patient needed to be tested, and public health would get back to us. Now, what I was advised to do on the day by public health was to look at the appointment book, look at all of the patients who could have possibly been in the waiting room at the same time as that particular patient, and which team members had any involvement with that patient. So that was the first step. Then we were advised for additional people to have COVID testing done. So by the next day, everyone in the practice had had COVID testing done. And what came to light at the end of that was that no one in the practice had actually tested positive if they had interacted with that patient, but the pathology collector was positive. Now, that pathology collector had been working in our practice for 3 days. So the decision was made to put us all into isolation. And I was asked to provide not only the list of patients who were in the waiting room simultaneously, but also the manual sign-in sheets. The public health department had the spreadsheets with the QR codes. So they got to people rather quickly and notified them that they had been exposed to a positive COVID-19 case. And then we scurried to get everything ready to work from home. The remote desktop, many of our doctors had them, not all of them. So we got the rest of the doctors up and running with remote desktop. And we also got most of our admin staff with remote desktop as well. There were some issues with that because some of the team had Mac computers rather than Windows, which were more difficult for our IT team to set them up. And it also meant that they may have only been able to manage access to one computer and not others. What we did find was that we had more staff than we had computers because we have shared rooms. And that was another challenge because we needed to get remote desktops for 3 or 4 desktops to some people. Phone diversions was again challenging. We had initially the phones diverted to one of our admin staff's mobiles, and then she was fielding that out to the rest of the team. That was day one, and that was incredibly challenging because the poor girl that had the phone diversion, her phone just melted down. So it was another day until we could get landlines to those that worked the most hours and get the apps installed on the other receptionists' mobile phones. Lots of things to check there, what their plans are, whether they have unlimited calls. The patient notifications, again, was hugely challenging because we had 1,284 COVID vaccine appointments scheduled for that period that we were in quarantine. So lots of SMSs sent out, updates on the website. We had practice signage. We're in a shopping centre, so luckily one of the head office from the shopping centre was able to print out some signs that I sent so that patients knew that we were closed temporarily and that they could book for telehealth via the website or even by sending an email to our reception team. And the communication with the practice team, as Gary mentioned, we had WhatsApp for our admin group, we had WhatsApp for our clinical team, but we found very quickly that we needed to have WhatsApp for the entire practice. So we went to the 3 WhatsApp groups very quickly and found that between that and the internal messaging with best practice, that worked extremely well for us. Deliveries, if you've got mail coming, who's going to accept the mail? Medical supplies, vaccines, we had to refuse a vaccine delivery because I had notified them that we would not be there to accept it, but it came anyway. And we had 2 iPads on order that have now arrived 40 days after their initial delivery was redirected. And managing the normal practice tasks, again, was quite difficult because we had new registrars that were about to arrive and we had to get ourselves up and running, make sure that we'd met the targets for our shared health summary uploads, that I'd done the number crunching for the workforce incentive program. So all the other things that you just have to do as normal practice management other than the challenges for lockdown. Takeaway message is make sure that you've got more staff details than you think you will need, because I had the standard details, but some people had moved address since the last time I had spoken with them. Public Health had also asked for postcodes of our staff members. It's great to know which LGA they're covered by with all of this LGA of concern and who can move from where to work somewhere else, what sort of mobile plan they have, do they have unlimited calls, what type of computer do they have at home, as to whether we might be able to organise them access to one desktop or multiple desktops. The IT, please develop a great relationship with your IT support if you don't already have one, because they were so vital, matching up the staff to which room, which desktop, which day. I had to get some allied health set up as well in our other clinic. And The phone systems were really interesting because if you don't know what's compatible with your office phone equipment, that's going to provide another challenge. We thought we could use one set of apps for mobile phones, but it wasn't going to work with our particular setup. And we had to get landlines for our full-timers and make sure that those landlines were NEC compatible. Messaging, we've used WhatsApp. I have used Vibe previously, whatever works for your team members, but just make sure that you've got one of those messaging apps that everybody can get to. And the other interesting thing was our GP team, because as much as you can prompt them to use telehealth, use video consults, e-prescribing, e-referrals, e-pathology, you always have a GP or two who are a little resistant to technology. And when you bring in something new for them, they go, oh, yes, I'll get around to that. Or maybe it's all too hard and it's time to retire. But this forced the reluctant ones to get on board and learn how to do electronic prescribing and electronic referrals. And the other thing that was really important is to just keep up to date with what's going to happen if your patients need a face-to-face consultation, and there is no one at your practice who can do that. So have a couple of options for the patients, nearby practices, someone that you communicate with quite frequently, and let them know what's happened and that they might be able to expect some of your patients arriving, because the patients can always go to emergency, but that's not ideal. And the patient communication, we don't have social media, a lot of practices do, and that's often communicated through Facebook if there's something going on. We relied on SMS, emails, updates on the website, and also practice signage, because we do have a lot of patients who are older and will just rock up to the practice and hope they can get a walk-in appointment. So many of those didn't realise that we were closed until they actually came to the practice and saw the signage. So that's what I have learned from my experience, and I'm very happy to take some questions later.
Denise, that just sounds like just an extraordinary activity that you went through. So many pieces of that puzzle. If you don't mind, can we run some questions past you now?
Of course.
Okay. So one of the questions was, how long did public health give you to get everything in order before going into isolation or before having to close down? Did they give you a time frame?
Now, we were instructed on the Wednesday night to all go and get tested. And then by Thursday night, we were closed.
Right. So you made that call yourselves to... Or...
It was advice from public health that we should be closed by Thursday night.
Cool.
So yes, there were some people still trying to tidy up things and get themselves organised in the practice on Thursday, but everyone was out by Thursday night.
Okay. And that leads on to another question is, would public health allow one designated staff member to check in on the practice, be there during the cleaning, get deliveries so you didn't wait 40 days for your iPads and that sort of thing?
Well, that was quite funny and quite frustrating, because every single person was put into quarantine if they had worked on any one of those 3 days that the pathology collector worked. Mm-hmm. Now, we were very lucky in that we had one uni student who hadn't worked that week, and she was available for the Thursday and Friday. So she was able to come in and help us a bit, manage some of those deliveries, refuse the vaccine delivery. Great, it was our second Pfizer delivery. She had to refuse it because there's no way we could have used it. It would have been expired. Well, we could have only used a little of it before it reached its expiry when we got back to work. So it was very challenging because of her limited availability and everybody else having to be in isolation.
Excellent, thank you. And one question that I think everyone is really interested in, it came in before the webinar and again now, is around the cleaning of the practice. What can you tell us about that in terms of who does the cleaning? Do they need to be accredited, that sort of thing?
They don't need to be accredited, but they need to know how to do a terminal clean. So I was very lucky that the cleaner that I use every night of the week, because we're open 7 days, knew how to do a terminal clean and was in there straight away.
Excellent, thank you. There's a comment, once you did get everybody up on their remote desktop, what did you have the admin staff doing while they were working from home?
Everything that they would have been doing if they had been working on site, except for the scanning. They couldn't scan, but they could answer phone calls, they could book appointments, reschedule appointments. They were allocating scanned documents. So my little uni student who was available for a couple of days would scan any mail that she had received, and it was allocated by one of the team members who were working from home.
Excellent. And things like checking on cold chain, how did that go? Do you have a remote monitoring, or was that person doing that as well?
Yes, we have remote monitoring, and we also had our little receptionist just popping in to make sure everything looked good.
Excellent. It's time for me to give you a quick Practice Hub demo, and it will be very quick. And then if you've got other questions, please continue to add them to the chat. We will still have some time at the end, and Gary and Denise will be happy to answer these questions as well. So Gary and I love talking about risk and systems. These are things that are really quite dear to our hearts. One of those things for me is the system that you can use is whatever system you have, but have a system. And of course, we think a very good system is Practice Hub. And a lot of the things that Gary talked about around communications, and Denise was saying, you know, signage, emails, all of those sorts of things. I think it's really important that you think ahead and that you have these things documented. One of the things that we have, for example, in our policies that were created last year when COVID first hit, was things like a working away from the practice policy and procedure. And I know that one of the questions that was sent through was, you know, what about privacy and reception staff working from home? And these are things that you can include in your procedures. So highlighting that even though your team are still working from home, they're still bound by the practice's privacy and confidentiality policies. So perhaps not taking phone calls with patients where there might be sensitive information in the dining area with the kids and the husband and everybody else circulating around them and those sorts of things. So, but having a policy around working away from the practice is really valuable. The other thing that we included as well was a working from home checklist. So, you know, again, as employers, it's important that your staff are safe when they're working from home as well. So thinking about equipment, and, you know, Denise, I bet you've got a checklist like this now. And Gary as well, you know, what do they have? What do they need as well? And also, again, as I said, from the safety, you know, tripping hazards, suitable light, if they've got a comfortable chair, all of these sorts of things that make it important if people are going to be working long hours from home as well. So that's one of the things that are in there. Other things that I think, you know, talking about communications. So, you know, I've very quickly, based on some of the comments that Denise and Gary have made, thought about, you know, our policy is around, you know, we need to have communications, and it's to make sure the patients are well informed. I imagine your patients are probably also very anxious at this time as well. So you're dealing not just with normal levels of anxiety, but heightened anxiety as well. So things that you might think about, you know, the door signs or your building signage, you know, keep the templates handy so that you can easily go in, print them, adjust them, whatever you need to do. Keep this information handy. Who manages your website? Who do you speak to? You know, what content are you going to put up there? What's the script on your answering machine? You know, how do you explain to your patients, you know, that you're closed for a certain amount of time? What is their access to care going to look like? You know, what should they do? as Denise mentioned, have an arrangement with a neighbouring practice or something like that. And you could have all this documented as well. So, and things like, if you're going to have SMS, who knows how to access the system to send out those SMS messages? Don't be running around at the last minute going, God, how do we do this? And same again with email. And again, checking that you're still meeting the very important privacy requirements as well when you're sending out these communications to your patients. So these are some of the things that I think is very important to have in there. Some of the other policies we've got around PPE. And Gary or Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you mention just before the webinar that depending on the PPE you're using, it might impact your shutdown period. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. New South Wales Health has put out an excellent matrix. If you do certain things in your practice, you won't be asked to shut down. This in New South Wales, it's an excellent document, and I believe we're going to make that available in the resources as well.
Fantastic. So again, as I say, having good policies around your PPE, around social distancing, so that you have that consistency, you have a system that you've thought through all of these areas as well. So other quick things, I guess, that I would highlight in this instance relating to Practice Hub, and I'm conscious that you will have a lot of questions, but one of the things might be things around your equipment register. So having things like, where are the laptops? Who is your, what equipment do you have? What do you need? The contracts register is terrific because you can keep all your supplier details in there. So Denise is talking about the fact, they needed to talk to their phone people, the IT people, all the various organisations, having all that contact information handy. And online, I mean, this is the other beauty of this, is you could be accessing this from anywhere. So if you suddenly find yourself working from home, you can still access this information. Denise, I think you mentioned your sign-in sheets, and I would say maybe part of your system, if it were, used maybe now, you might be able to say, do you scan them now so that they're handy? They're not all
certainly do.
Yeah. So I think that was, a bit of one of those things you may not think about until it actually happens. How do you share those sign-in sheets if they're still in hard copy? So scan them and have them somewhere centralized where you can find them. The other, of course, good thing about the Practice Hub message, I know you guys use WhatsApp, which was fantastic, but also if your team are also working in their Practice Hub site, you've got a message board. So it's very simple to send messages to the team. When they log in, they get those messages. You can also send them from the platform via email to your team, and you can pick which users need to see which messages. So again, certain messages for your doctors, for your admin, for your nursing staff, and so on. So those are all sorts of things that you've got already set up in one platform that you can reference. All right, so look, those of you who have Practice Hub, and I can see a few of you on the attendee list there, if you haven't already thought about your business continuity planning, really incorporate your Practice Hub site in that process. Really have a think about storing all the documentation, the processes, communications can all be in here. For those of you that don't have Practice Hub, I really urge you, this has been a very, very light overview. I really urge you to have a look at our website and book a demonstration with one of our team. I think it's probably about the best half hour to 45 minutes of time that you'll spend, because it will give you some real insights into ways in which you can use technology to drive more efficiencies in your practice at this stage as well. So let's talk about some more questions. Let me go through. So one of the questions, thank you very much to Denise, Practice Hub, don't leave home without it. You can work from home with it too. So we have, somebody's mentioned issues facing those who work as contractors. I'm wondering if that means the medical practitioners. Is that something that you addressed in terms of with your medical staff, your medical team?
Contractors, well, there's a number of ways. What do you determine as contractors? These could be independent contractors as medical practitioners, or they could be contractors in relation to allied health accordingly. Really, it's up to the responsibility of the individual contractor to provide their tools of trade. And this is one of the definitions of independent contract, are tools of trade. So they may have their own laptops or own PCs at home accordingly. And then to practice the responsibility really to put the connectivity and the system together around that. I think the important thing about contractors, when we're sitting down looking at a disaster recovery plan in our lockdown, is identifying who are our contacts. And my contact sheet goes to a full A4 page. And these are all the contractors on site, allied health, or everyone on site, even down to my phone people, my IT people, pathology, and VOC is a classic example as well. Who do we need to contact in an emergency? Just for instance, my pathology collector. We've made an arrangement with our pathology, for instance. We'll all be tested on site, not go to collection centres. They'll come on site, we'll come on site, we'll take the test, phone the contractor, the pathology collector, and he'll put it in a red bag and that'll go off in an emergency process. That's a simple thing in relation to simple things of organising those contractors that you may need to deal with. So everyone will come to practice and the test will be done on site here. So they're the sorts of things you've got to start to think about. How do I have the relationship with my contractors?
Thanks, Gary. Another question we've had is, what would be the role of the practice nurse that's chargeable to Medicare during lockdown, especially if the doctors are working from home?
This is a good question. In my particular case, I will have a nurse who has access to our phone system and remote system that will manage all the SMSs, all those reminder systems, etc., that take place. On my other nursing staff, there's a possibility we can look at, we've looked at this, is setting up video calls for mental health, preparing for mental health plans, and maybe for GPMPs and those other things which are allowable under telehealth via a remote. A lot of those may be things like 10997s you may want to look at when you're looking at video remotes as well. I'm lucky, I've got a couple of chronic disease management unit nurses that can still continue to do the support mechanism for certain components of Medicare items as well. Treatment room nurses, that becomes more challenging for us.
Denise, similar answer from you?
I totally agree with Gary, but in our practice, all of our nurses were so exhausted, they all said, let me please just have 2 weeks off.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I guess the silver lining approach, isn't it? One of the questions we have here, and I must admit we did have a lot of questions relating to HR. And I guess what I would say to many of you is, regardless of whether you have insurance with Avant, either with the practice or your practitioners, and I'm sure all the MDOs have information, but certainly the Avant COVID pages on their website are fantastic. So they have 3 different ones. So this is kind of, we have the general questions, and there is a section around employment. So I know a lot of you ask questions around employment, around can you mandate vaccines for your staff and things like that. I highly recommend you go and have a look at the sites here, because it will answer a lot of those questions. And sometimes it's not exactly black and white either. So they've got information, the general information, they've got information around the vaccines and vaccinations, consent, Medicare and practice management. So, and you can see by the dates on them that a lot of the information, some of it hasn't changed recently, but where it has, they're updating this regularly. It's a massive undertaking to keep all of this up to date, and I think they do an amazing job. So those I would highly recommend. But one of the questions was, how are employees remunerated if there is a shutdown? Do they take it as annual leave, personal leave, etc.? So I think this is probably, I'm not sure what Gary and Denise would respond to that.
There are provisions. The Fair Work Ombudsman and Commissioner have made some comment around this already. So if you go to the Fair Work website, there is so staff can take annual leave accordingly, and depending upon, they may take personal leave depending upon the situation. But there is no requirement for practices to maintain their normal hour payment process. It's up to individual practice and the requirements around Fair Work on that. And of course, how they are paid is not whether they're permanent, part-time, full-time or casual from there. Yes, of course, in shutdown, there are going to be staff who are going to be affected in relation to remuneration. But have a look at the Fair Work determinations on that. And it does have it in your sheet, what you've got on the screen, Anna Maria. I've had a look at that. There is some determination around there.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I just make a quick comment on preparing? You know, as I said, I take the view that it's not if we're going to be hit, it's when we're going to be hit. And we've actually already prepared all our, as best we can, all our messaging. We've already prepared our signages on Corfu boards, and they are off-site at someone else's place. If we're caught and we can't get there, they'll come down and put them up for us. All our SMSs are pre-designed already, written, ready to press the button. All our phone messages are already done, and all we've got to do is remotely log those across to the new messaging. So rather than scrambling on the day, we need to sit back and think about, what do I need to identify in advance that'll make life a lot easier? Now, some of these things we're going to provide to you, these checklists, we'll provide these to you as part of the resources as well. But I can't stress enough the importance of pre-preparing or identifying the things you may need to do. You know, as your appointments, have the doctors told you what are the hours of the practice now? Have you decided what the hours of the practice are? Are they 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. like you normally do, or are you going to go from 8 till 3 if you're doing remotely? They're the sort of things you've got to start to consider. What are the hours of the operation of the practice, and what are the hours of the doctors who are working on that particular day for remote telehealth as well? So the appointment book can be set up in advance. And when you go remote, there's someone allocated to manage the appointment book to set it up. So they're the sorts of things we need in your checklists. You need to go through and start to pre-think about. And some of these things I picked up as a result of Denise's practice being bitten in the first site. And we were partly as well. So pre-thinking what may be those things, and that checklist we hope that we will give you. I've allocated one staff member for the doctors to scan and send information to, whether they are referrals or whether they are scripts, etc. So one staff member who's working remote will manage all that. And because if doctors send stuff from their home, they're using their own private email address, and they don't want to do that. So it goes to a centralised person who will manage that administration component with a practice email address. So they're the things you may need to think about. Home phone systems, for instance, to explain to doctors how to remove private numbers off their mobile phones, because I don't want patients to know what their mobile phone number is. So those sort of idiosyncratic things that we need to start to think about in advance. Thanks, Anna Maria.
Thanks, Gary. Denise, I know we've been asked a question about the public health unit, and I know when we flagged this question with you, you did say it is a bit confusing to navigate some of their information. Is there any tips you might have on dealing with the public health units?
Well, as Gary mentioned, the risk matrix is really helpful, because public health will want to know how long you were exposed, what PPE you were wearing, what was the proximity, how far away were you, and the nature of the relationship. So what I needed to do in the first instance was to supply just names of all staff who were working and their mobile phone numbers. In the second instance, it was a much bigger spreadsheet. So it was not only the names, the roles, but what was the nature of the interaction as well as the PPE. So, for example, one of our doctors wears a respirator. He does skin checks. So he has this FFP2 respirator and looks like Darth Vader. So his advice was, okay, if you were wearing your respirator and you only interacted with that person for 20 seconds, just test and come back to work. Not a problem. One of the other doctors who was just wearing a surgical mask, they said, test, go home, we'll get back to you. So it's very much dependent on the physical proximity, as well as the length of time you were with the person and what PPE either of you were wearing.
Excellent. Good information. Thank you. Last couple of questions that we received. One was around, is there financial assistance for the practice if they have to isolate for 2 weeks, if they're close contacts? I guess that my thoughts on that are it's a constantly changing environment depending on where you're located. There's federal, there's state things. I would suggest, and Gary and Denise, you might have other additional thoughts, but my suggestion is your first point of contact should be your accountant. In my experience, in my other business life, they tend to be very much on top of what's available. That's a good first port of call.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. Is your accountant is possibly your best port of call, because they have an understanding, and it'll vary from state to state too, Anna Maria, what the requirement, what incentives may be available. And you may check with your insurer as well. There could be, depending upon what insurance policies the individual practitioners may have regarding business expense plans or those income protection plans, etc. And so you may need to have that discussion with the individual doctors may have a discussion with their finance advisor around that as well.
Thank you for those people who've mentioned, where they can get their rapid antigen testing kits and the state guidelines for PPE for health workers always. And I think that's the thing. I think I noticed the other day, I did the COVID training module a while ago. And like many of you, I get those emails telling you what's been updated. And I think they're up to issue 20. So there's been 20 changes, which is quite a lot in the time we've been doing this. It's definitely important to keep up to date. Just to finish off, Gary, I realise we have a couple of slides there. You might just some final thoughts and in terms of anything to add to the slide that we've got here. I think your comment about the dedicated email is a great one, so that your doctors aren't sending them out from their personal emails.
Yeah, we set a new one up called info@tyndale.com.au. So we've got a standard email address now. To dealing with any correspondence during a lockdown. And Maria, just to finish off some takeaway messages. The first one, I think we need to understand what is risk management and how it may impact our business. And after today's discussion, you'll find that out. Encourage everyone in the business to keep an open mind and develop the capacity to look at things from fresh eyes. There is no comment or statement or thought wrong when we're talking about risk management. There's everything there. Create these systems to manage change. And I suppose the last one is to start thinking now about how you would manage a shutdown in your particular practice. Thanks very much. Back to you, Anna Maria.
Thank you, Gary. So just while I leave that slide up there, if you're already a Practice Hub client, somebody has asked me for the practice shutdown comms policy. I will build that out a bit more and certainly we'll be putting that in the Practice Hub site for all our customers. If you're not a Practice Hub client, please go on our website. You can book a demonstration and you can certainly have a look through at the features and benefits on there as well. As we mentioned, you will get a recording and you will also get some resources as well that we've discussed. And I think we are pretty much good to go. Can I thank Gary once more? Gary, always amazing words of wisdom. Denise, thank you so much for your insight. It was really terrific. I noticed in the channel that somebody posted that they're going to resign rather than actually go through a shutdown. I'm hopeful that after the information that you've both provided today, they feel a little more confident about if this is something they have to go through, they will feel much more confident about going through it and doing it, not making it such a traumatic event. So thank you to both of you and thanks to all our attendees today. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.